Hello and welcome to the Screen Composer Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. Classically trained as a vocalist, Red got her start in cabaret and musical theater before she was bitten by the film scoring bug, a craft she says combines all the things. She and her musical partner Maya Saxell won a Leo Award for their work on Charlotte's Song, a first in the category for female composers. She also received a Leo nod for her work on White Raven, which she scored using only the human voice. We talk about the challenges of the music business and her time as a singer-songwriter. She discusses the film she could score for the rest of her life, innovating her process, and what the pressures of the pandemic have revealed for her, musicians, and the community. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Red Heartbreaker. Red, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Good day. Thank you for having me.
So during our pre-chat for this conversation, you gave me an absolute masterclass on vocal performance. And I have to say it was probably one of the most enlightening and surprising conversations and instructions on music that I've had in a really long time. And you were telling me things about the voice and about how one can use it as an instrument that I found absolutely fascinating. I thought it was so interesting and so helpful too. Things I'd never thought about. Was that your first intro? Like, is that how you got into music, was through the voice?
That's a really great question. So I started in music as a singer, but not really identifying as a singer, like not really thinking about singing as real music. It was just a sort of thing that I did, incessantly singing, much to the chagrin of everyone who knew me. I used to be like, "Hey, constant noise," from my parents and stuff when I was, little. I'm just wandering around singing to myself. But I started performing publicly at age 7 and like took it really seriously as a childhood hobbyist can do. But from the time I was 7 or 8, I knew that specifically what I wanted to do was be a composer. So I went through, elementary school, high school, and did as much ad hoc stuff as I could. I took the odd lesson. I took cello lessons shortly. I took piano lessons briefly. They didn't seem to mesh. But then when I got to sort of like later elementary school, I started playing flute. And the flute was really where I was like, okay, this is my instrument. I get this. And like my sense of self as a classical musician really came from, the idea of playing the flute. And then that carried through to, being really passionate about choral music and musical theater and stuff like that. So I knew that I wanted to go to post-secondary education for composition and to be a conductor. And I come from a very low-income family. So I had intended to take a gap year after high school and save up some cash. And I panicked and talked myself out of taking a year off, thinking that I was going to either lose momentum or that it was somehow going to be lazy for me to take a year off. Mm-hmm. So I just in a flash looked at everywhere that I could apply to. As everybody else was receiving their acceptance letters, I was starting to apply. And there was only one school on my list of schools that I would want to go to for composition that was still accepting applications, which is Capilano University in the North Shore in Vancouver, which has a stellar classical music program, has a stellar jazz program, and a transcendent musical theater program. Like people come out of that program ready to rock. And so I applied in a flurry, and because I had applied so fast, hadn't fully researched the fact that they weren't actually doing composition-specific programs at that point in time. They were all performance programs. So I was asked to pick a main instrument as a performer. So they said, what instruments are you applying with? And I said, okay, well, I play flute very seriously, but as an amateur. I'm not, conservatory trained or anything like that. And I've been singing since I was 7. They said, okay, well, here's the entry requirements for school if these two things are your majors. And so I looked at the two lists of requirements, and flute was like, you need to be playing like Grieg concertos, you need to be flutter tonguing and double tonguing and triple tonguing and all these rudiments that were way above my head. You need to be coming in with grade 10 conservatory to start. Or as a vocal major, you can come in, bring 3 pieces of contrasting styles. We'll test your ability to hold pitch. We'll test you for perfect pitch. We'll test you for your ability to harmonize, how you take feedback and all those sorts of things, and test you on a couple of other little bits and bobs. And that will be how we evaluate if you're a singer or not. And so I accidentally became an opera singer. Whoops. As one does. Just, whoops, slipped and fell. Failed the shit out of my entry exam, along with like 75% of everybody else who failed their entry exam to go to music school. Studied like crazy, redid it, got in, went to school. And I pursued classical music as a vocalist, but with an end goal to compose. So I went through school as long as I wanted to be there for. And then when I started really being pushed strongly out of composition and into pure performance, I pieced out and pivoted. And I wanted to do the thing that was the most opposite vocally that I could do from opera that I could. So the first thing I did was I wrote and recorded a trip-hop EP.
Wow.
With Matt Rogers in his parents' basement.
Okay, wow.
The birth of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood studio in his parents' home. And Matt Rogers is a preeminent songwriter, musician, composer. He's unbelievable. He's one of the most fantastic musicians. It makes me so happy that he's still in my life. And then I started, doing a bunch of songwriting and being in a bunch of original bands and doing a bunch of touring and stuff like that. And I kind of got farther and farther away from classical music. But what I did was, because what I was really doing is working hard as a singer, I started just trying to take everything that I had learned in classical school and hack it, basically. I tried to just hack it for the needs of wherever I was so that I could make sure that I was singing in a healthy way. I was able to be as creative as possible, but that I was also not stuck singing in this voice all the time. It took me a while to find my chest voice and stuff like that. And then, I was doing all these sorts of things. And then, I started getting involved in, the sort of local community related to burlesque. So I was in the first in Vancouver live music bump and grind burlesque bands in 2005, 2006. With a guy named Blue, which is very funny because neither one of us planned that. His name just happens to be Blue and my name just happens to be Red. So we each thought we were fucking with each other when we met each other. I was like, yeah, ha ha ha, I've heard this joke before, come on. And so then I started doing larger format shows, and we started getting into things like musical theater. Like I started getting into, Fringe Fest here and writing full-length musicals. And then I started getting into, back into arranging for small orchestras. So I started arranging for, small 8-piece pit orchestras, conducting them myself, writing books for musicians, for the singers, rehearsing them, doing one-on-one training to make sure they could actually deliver. And then when I met my now ex-husband, but when he was just finishing film school, he asked me if I had ever considered writing music for movies before, and I hadn't. And so I gave it a shot in a couple of short films that he was doing for school. And I started off recording on a Tascam DP01, which is it's got an 80s graphing calculator sized viewfinder, and it's an 8-track digital recorder with a partition. You have to open your partition and dump your tracks off, and hope to God you got everything right. In that sort of Beatles way, you've got 8 tracks, bounce them down to 1, then you've got 7 tracks to work with, and you bounce them down to 1, then you've got 7 more tracks to work with, and bounce them down. And the first 6 or 7 or 8 movies I made like that.
Wow.
Totally blind. Mm-hmm. And then taught myself GarageBand. Kind of grew out of that. I topped out on GarageBand pretty fast, and then self-taught with Logic. And I have just never looked back. That was 2006.
Was it an instant bug for you when you started getting into doing it for picture with a narrative in mind? In that sense, was that okay, now this feels like what I meant to do?
It's 1,000%.
Wow.
A number that does not really exist in the world. Film scoring combines all of the things. Do you know what I mean? It combines. Yeah. I'm really passionate about a number of different things, and food is one of these things. It's actually one of the ways that I keep myself creative, and when I really need to sort of pivot away from what I'm doing and do something creative and make something from nothing or from raw materials and like get my head around whatever it is that I'm working on. Food is often very helpful for that. The combination of different elements that could happily stand alone, but when they're combined together, it rounds up all the things that I care about musically, and it puts me in a position where I have to think about something other than, do I want to write a song? You know what I mean? Like writing for my own pleasure is something that I've always done, but I much prefer, unless I have something very specific to say or a particular yen to try something. Mostly I prefer to write for a project because I feel as though then I have a jumping off point and I have a sense of utility. And it's quite funny because I don't think about the sense of utility for other people's music, but then I look at my own music and I think, like, yes, the world needs artists to express and say their piece. I just don't think that I have anything to say that really needs saying right now that couldn't be better served by me listening more, putting other people forward more, signal boosting the messages or the art or the things that need to be made. I don't really want to write music for myself unless there's something particular that I'm trying to accomplish. And I think writing for the sake of writing is good, but I've done a lot of that. And so it feels really good right now to be of use to other people. It feels really good to see a movie. And, like, I'm kind of ranging off here a little bit, but we know this working in post-production where you see the movie and you're not really seeing a movie. You're seeing, like, the mise en place, right? You're seeing, like, your prepped ingredients all laid out together and the pan is hot and maybe your aromatics are in there, but it's still a hack job. There's shots missing, there's temp dialogue, perhaps the picture isn't locked, or perhaps they say it's locked and it isn't. But it really is, it requires so much of you to make a movie. Like, it requires so much of your creativity and innovation and musicianship. And so, like, for my journey coming from a non-traditional place of coming as a classical musician, but by way of voice, a lot of people are coming through music school, playing piano or guitar or, wind instrument or something like that. And then it's very much like driven straight into composition side of things. But I just took this great big loop and came kind of in the back door. And what that means is that I was able to kind of hack my state of mind about what the right musical choice is. So I don't have a particular bent that I want to accomplish in a movie.
I was going to ask that,
voice.
Going back to your education, if you had gone or were able to go into the composition side, do you think that would have changed your trajectory?
100%. I think it would have changed my trajectory because the way that we encounter the people in our lives is a reflection of where we end up, right?
Yeah.
And so I left school, and I'm not ashamed to admit this at all. I left school because I saw that it was putting me into kind of a meat grinder that was going to constrain me. Mm-hmm. And I was broke as hell, man. I was skipping meals. I was working on the North Shore in Vancouver, or I was living on the North Shore in Vancouver, working downtown during I believe it was a 9-month transit strike. And from the moment I started living and going to school on the North Shore, I was immediately up to my eyebrows in debt because there was no way to get from where I was to work and there were no jobs.
Wow.
So, like, your economics really has a significant impact on your path. And so I had to make a really difficult decision to say, okay, do I finish my degree or do I go toward what I know is the right next choice for me and just go with my gut? And I went with my gut. I haven't ruled out, going back and like pursuing a more formal education for composition, but I'd rather just do it. And there's a point at which your education is far outstripped by your experience. And there are some places where I think that, not that I don't have anything more to learn, I know absolutely fucking nothing. I know nothing. But what I need to know, I don't know if I can get it in a classroom.
Right. Yeah.
So,
That makes a lot of sense. And this is sort of an industry filled with people who come from a sort of winding path and have had varying experiences that feed into their success and their ability to communicate with other people and their ability to have a vision for something. As you said, this sort of interest in amplifying other voices. There's it's an interesting ingredients list for the media composer, I think, and you see a lot of this stuff come up again and again. What was it? What was your experience in the music business compared to compared to film scoring and TV scoring?
I will say, and I know that I've spoken about this in public and in private a lot before, I think it's a different beast. And I think that you really have to find, wherever you are, you have to find your people. In the music industry, and as a working, gigging, recording musician, I still do a lot of that. I mean, COVID notwithstanding, BC's starting to open up now, so we've just the other day learned that we're going to be able to start doing events of 50 people and stuff like that. Generally speaking, I'd be doing anywhere between 50 and 70 dates a year at this point in time as a full-time media composer and as a voice coach, right? So usually my dance card is really full. But in the life of a gigging musician, it's so much about trying to stand out from other people and do your own thing. But there is this sense of scarcity that can permeate the community, which I think is unfair to the artists. And I think that the artists who get caught up in that do themselves and the community a disservice. But you have to be okay with people being like that and protect yourself a little bit from folks trying to get something out of you, or folks trying to mine you for information so that they can be competitive with you. And also, I mean, there's a lot of not very safe people in the music business. There's a lot of people in the music business that have the perception of having a lot of power over what circles you can run in, what bars you can play, what label is going to be willing to talk to you, what management or collaborators or anything like that. So there's a lot of there's some dangerous people out there. There's also a vast majority of people that are spectacular, gifted, talented, skilled, loving, reciprocal. But there are just enough people that I have encountered where it's not a community that I feel strongly about maintaining my place as a front and center artist. I don't feel as motivated to sort of elbow my way through a pack of people that are being told to feel that there's not enough room for everyone, because there really is enough room for everyone.
Yeah.
And by contrast, when I first got more solidly into the film scoring community, I scored for a long time before I was ever an SCGC member, before I ever got to know the folks at SOCAN in Vancouver, or anything like that. And so when I first started getting into the scene and getting connected with people like yourself and all the other folks that we know, I will 100% cop to this. I would say the first year or so that I was sort of running in, I was still puffing up my chest music industry wise. I was still walking into a room being like, what the fuck is up, bitches? I'm here. You ready? Let's go. And I probably lost a bunch of jobs from doing that because it is an ego experiment, right? And that's because I come from this place where if you're a performer, you're supposed to stand out. You're supposed to be the point of the apex, right?
Yeah. When you're an artist in the recording or the music business side, when it is about that central focus of you being the performer, you being the sort of central messenger of whatever it is that your vision is, beyond all the ego things, I find one thing that I struggle with, or I struggled with when I was performing, and now when I'm sort of thinking about dipping my toe back into it as a performer and a writer, that sort of you focus thing, even if you've developed this sort of outer shell of a persona or something else you're presenting, that's it's asking a lot of a person. It's asking a lot of a creative soul, and I think that's one of the things I really love about what we do is that, you know, some people might say, well, you're sort of shielding yourself, or you're hiding behind somebody else's vision. But, you know, I like to think of it more favorably, in that we're actually helping people and being good collaborators and helping other people bring their vision to bear. And you certainly have a huge responsibility in that. And there's, you know, you do have responsibilities if things don't go right. So it's not that you're just going, la, 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 I don't have any, there's no consequence for me. But I find that in a way much more healthy. Or it has the sort of jumping off point at least seems healthier to me.
I like that perception of it, and I also like the notion of. I'm a big believer in Stephen Covey's, you know, seven habits for highly effective people.
Sure.
Not because it's, you know, a self-help book, you know, that was very popular for a while and somehow validated, but because they are things that are very healthy to practice. And the notion of reading a book and then you're cured is antithetical to the concept, which is to say, here's a simple concept and here's how it affects you. And if you become really good at practicing these things, which isn't to say that you're perfect at them, if you practice them and roll them out in your life, you're going to be more effective as a human being, right? So the whole, you know, the whole perception of ego and the whole, you know, song and dance of look at me, I'm so special, you know, you can be really special and not have to tell everybody about it. And so when you have to be that blatantly like, it's me, it's me, it's me, it's me, I think that it's just, it takes too much time and energy that really should be spent focused on beginning with the end in mind, which is what do I want to end up with at the end of this project, this 2 to 5 year period. You know, if you're thinking about, you know, career building and stuff like that, you know, think about what are you willing to do? What are you willing to like go all in on for between 2 and 5 years to see if it works, right? Okay, well, I want to have this many credits and I want to have this and that and the other thing. If you've got a strong plan for yourself, you've got a strong goal, you don't have time to be like, check it out, I'm the most interesting person in the room. You don't have to be the most interesting person in the room. You just have to be the most authentic version of yourself, because all these musical choices that we make are subjective to our experience. And we're being hired for a collective experience. But if we're faking it for the sake of being like branding and presenting and like doing that networky thing that we have to do so much in the music industry, then when you get home at the end, you just spent the day creating a false version of yourself instead of good content that'll get you the next fucking job, right? And like, so it's about, I think film scoring is so fantastic because by the time the filmmaker gets to you, we were talking about this the other day, to make a movie is a series of statistical impossibilities.
Yeah.
It is a miracle within a miracle within a miracle, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's the fact of a movie being made and being completed and released wherever it's going to be released, be it on a personal website or on Vimeo or in the theaters or wherever it's going to be. The idea that somebody had a thought to write a story and all the steps that happened in between and then it got somewhere, that is a statistical impossibility. And then the motherfucker has to be good, right? So by the time all of those steps have happened and they, you know, quite often it ends up that, you know, picture's locked and then we get to see it for the first time. We're not often on board from the very, very beginning. I prefer that we would, but everybody's so goddamn tired of the movie by that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're in the kill the baby phase. They're like, I've loved the baby in pre-production. I've loved the baby in production. I've loved the baby in post-production until the edit. And now it's time to kill my baby. Like, it's time to get rid of this shit. Put it on somebody else's desk, walk away so I can be fresh. And that means that you and I get to benefit from that phase where they're like, I need a break. And I'm like, I need to get going and I need the space to get going. And if you're just constantly jockeying for position and to be the shiniest, sparkliest person in the room, it just sucks the life out of you. It just like sucks all of that vital energy that should be in the movie. It should be, like the rubber should be on the road.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not in the showroom.
So you mentioned Stephen Covey, and you mentioned thinking about, you have time constraints on terms of, or just as an example, you've mentioned a couple of time constraints on what you want to achieve at certain times. How do you approach your career? Do you have are you very strategic and stepwise in terms of how you're building it? Or is it more of, let's see where the chips fall and let's make the connections organically? Do you have a little tucked away somewhere, something that says, by this date, I will be X, Y, Z?
One of the things that I focus on very strongly is what I like to think of as the 3 avenues of gain. So I have metrics, or internal sort of metrics. The 3 avenues of gain are love, money, and opportunity. So love it's a project that is so transcendent, that is so exciting that I can't help but need to make it. And then I have a minimum amount that I can work for to be able to afford to work for that much. I don't like working for the minimum. There are some projects where you look at them and you say, the work that I can do in this is important to me career-wise so that I can show the best of what I can offer, which, because, it's not the Red Show when I'm making a movie, right? If I'm making a rom-com, I'm not there to show how many fancy things I can do. I'm there to serve the movie.
Yeah.
Right? So there are some times when my desire to show people the best of what I can do, and not just the best, but the most of what I can do. Sometimes that correlates with the movie. But oftentimes what you're doing is you're serving the movie. So love is an opportunity where the movie really needs the most creativity, the most innovation, the most unique thing that I can do. And it's hard to pass up a project like that.
Of course.
So I have a minimum, and I go, you're an independent filmmaker and you're making your first movie, and you are a singularity. You are a person who gets it, and I need to be a part of your journey. I have a couple of people that I work with that are like that. I'm actually, I just wrote a song for a movie like that I unfortunately can't talk a lot about, but wrote a song for that movie, and then they're shooting right now, but there's going to be some singing on set, and then I'll be scoring it in the fall. And that's one of those ones where it's like, I have a base amount that I need to be able to work, and I am dying to score this movie. So that's love. Money. Money is money. I don't care who wants to preserve this whole polite conversation thing. Money is great.
And when you say money, just to sort of clarify, do you mean money, or do you mean any form of value that can be extended?
No, I mean money specifically.
All right.
So love is creative value, and therefore the potential of showing what I can do. Money this is enough money for me to make a project that is going to really enable me to upgrade my studio, keep working, keep fresh, work with a new set of filmmakers or a new studio or whatever it is, but it's going to be a big enough paycheck that it's worth doing.
Right. Yeah.
Or then there's opportunity. This movie might not be the greatest thing in the entire world, and that's a reality. Not every, as I said, even the most sort of meh movie is still a miracle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So all respect and love, but not all works of art are created equal.
True.
So there are some projects that are not the greatest project you may have ever seen in your life, and maybe the paycheck isn't so great, but it's somebody that you're like, aha, they're making a lot of content, and I see their trajectory, and I see where they're going, and I want into that community. I want to be top of mind, because when that money does come in, and when they really can afford for me to do something that's in the love category or in the money category, that helps me move to the next step. Right. So I would say that I plan my career more in a modular way like that, where I have a true north where I know where I want to end up eventually, long term. By the time I'm John Williams' age, I'm that's what I want to have accomplished. And that's a short list in my mind, and that's a list I keep very close to my chest. It's just for me. I've set myself a few goals that scare me and that I think are unlikely for me to reach in my life. I'm still gonna try. Fuck it. Let's do it live. Fuck fuck it, let's do it.
I love it. That's great.
If I could get business cards, I think, well, I have business cards, but like, I feel like that should be my tagline. Fuck it, let's do it.
That's great.
So yeah, like little decisions, not little decisions, but like modular decisions. And then if I'm starting a new phase of anything, if I'm starting a new project or anything like that's a more, committed project, for me, it has to be worth doing for somewhere between 2 and 5 years.
Right.
So if I'm unwilling to put 2 to 5, depending on the nature of the project, if I'm unwilling to put between 2 and 5 years into it, then it's not important enough and I don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that approach. There's a sort of a 1%-y type of way of approaching these things where you're just like putting effort into a specific time over a period of time, the outcome of which is indeterminate, right? You can't guarantee any results. You can't say, well, I'm going to end up here or not. And those kind of goals, sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes, you're not a really great gauge yourself of where you're going to end up in your career or how long it's going to take you to do that. And if you have this random sort of, well, in 5 years I'll be doing this, and you're not, it can be upsetting, to say the least.
And I also think that, the nature of our industry is that there are too many, I'm going to use this word again, subjective elements. There are far too many quantifiable elements and criteria that govern our industry, right? So it's really interesting. I think the decision matrix for how to decide how to choose a composer, sure, you put your pitch in, maybe you spec, maybe you've got a great demo reel, maybe you've got a good playlist or that sort of thing, but it's entirely a gut choice, and it's a gut choice for like anywhere from $7,000-8,000 to $250,000, and people are just like, nah, that one, and they don't have to give any quantifiable criteria for why this one and not that one, right? Yep. It's a gut feeling, and that's where bias lives. Bias, like other shitty things, live in the gut. But you can't really take that personally, because musicians are making gut decisions as well. Why is oboe right here but clarinet is not? You just get a feeling, right? So it's not that the gut is inherently bad, but it is inherently fallible. Oh, yeah. Right? And it's inherently human for all the trappings and tribulations that come with humanity. There's no metric that you can say composer XYZ has this special fairy dust and that special fairy dust. It's just they seem right, they seem not. Completely subjective. And as you were saying a thing the other day of, that, you're writing a menu for a diner, but you don't know what they're looking for dinner. You don't really know what they feel like for dinner. They said, I'd like Italian. Yeah. Maybe what they're dying for is cioppino, and you offered them, arancia, or like, you offered them a baked ziti, and they're like, fuck ziti. I was expecting risotto, right?
Or maybe they meant Portuguese and they don't know the difference.
Exactly, right? So, tricky.
You mentioned a few films when we were talking the other day, which are sort of, I would say, maybe your dream gigs. And there was one there was one that had a really great caveat about what would have to happen before you jumped in on them.
Okay, so and I mean this with my whole heart, and I should preface this by saying you and I are both self-identified atheists. And so I don't believe in woo, and I don't believe in the universe wants and desires. I think there's lots of things I don't understand, and I think that eventually we'll have a scientific explanation for those things, and it will be boring as hell. So I'm okay with there being things I don't know. I'm excited to know as little as I do, because that means I have lots of life left to live. So if I could only make one movie forever, it would be Interstellar. That movie is like the distillation of every fascinating idea of existence and quantum space and the power of emotion and family and time, and could make it forever, happily. If I could only make two movies forever, it would be Interstellar and then Lars von Trier movies, but the caveat is that I would have to teach him about intersectional feminism and make sure he got it before I'd be willing to work with that guy, because that guy has problems. But if he could get his shit together, I would die to make Melancholia. I would die to make Melancholia. I would die to make Nymphomaniac, like a 4.5 hour brutal exploration of like the darkest corners of humanity. Come on, sign me up. I will write 4 hours and 59 minutes of music for that movie in a heartbeat. And you can cut all of it. Just give me the movie. Yeah. I think exploration of humanity in interesting and less often seen ways is very motivating to me. And I could not be more interested in science fiction and transhumanism. The notion of transhumanism to me is endlessly fascinating. You know, I read, we were talking the other day about this, I read the Altered Carbon books and saw the show, and like the books, I have to say, I think were some of the most feminist writing I've ever seen. And it's a series of books about futuristic mercenaries who go around killing each other through space. You know, it doesn't seem like the most feminist thing that you could read, but everybody is just a person experiencing life in the future within a capitalist system, and what that means. What does that mean for warfare? What does that mean for relationships? What does that mean for agency? What does that mean for racism and xenophobia and bias and ableism? And, you know, if your body is just a temporary envelope into which you can be ported from place to place, and the solar system is entirely open, there's a lot of different ways to live your life. That's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's, you know, that's the thing about science fiction, and, well, I suppose to a certain degree fantasy as well, but, and so often, unfortunately, it seems to be, you know, they're not necessarily exploring those kinds of ideas. They're just like, ooh, cool spaceship. Ooh, lasers. Let's fire those. Ooh, let's have a massive scene with tons of people killing each other in fantastic ways. Mm-hmm. But I think that's the very fertile ground to mine for those kinds of things. Those ideas that I think are so potent in terms of how they can be expressed musically. I mean, I think that's certainly where I think some of the, you know, if I had to sort of put a pin on what I think my music is really about when I'm writing very honestly, or when I found a project that allows me to say those things, it's about this kind of transcendent, like wondering state where it's like, what is this about it that's sort of basic core, you know? That's really cool. This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers. And now, back to our show. I want to talk about one of the films that you worked on that you were nominated for a Leo for.
Oh, great.
And that's White Raven, which is a very unique and beautiful, I should say, also
Thank
score. Tell me a bit about how you began working with Andrew Moxham and how you came about working in that way and what it's all about.
Well, that was a really special project to me. Mox is part of the community of people that I know through my ex-husband, and we all sort of worked together at Vancouver Film School. Them in the acting department, me in digital design, sound design, a couple of other programs. And so I had seen that he was making something, and I believe he had put a note out on social media just seeing if there was anybody who was a choral writer. And I was like, I am absolutely, I'd love to work with you. And it seemed like communication didn't come through. And then it was like 6 months or 8 months later or something like that. And I was at where was it? Was it Acme or something? It was a diner of some sort, I believe. It was either a cafe or a diner in town. And I saw him having a meeting with somebody across the room, and I just wandered up to him and I was like, oh, hey, like, did you ever find, you know, a choral composer? And he's like, no, actually, we never found anybody. And I was like, hello. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you did that. I'm like, I said it to you. So he said, okay, let's try doing the trailer. So I scored the trailer. And he had this vision in his mind that he wanted a completely choral score. So I did that for the trailer, and he loved it and was super happy with it. And so when the film got cut together, basically there was a sort of like the first third of the movie is, you know, setting the scene of all the characters, and then all these characters go on a sort of yearly camping trip into the woods, except there's a lot of significant unresolved issues, and for one character in particular, a deep violent underpinning. And that's as much as I'll say about that, because it's on iTunes. You should definitely download it and check it out. So, you know, it's a bunch of people that I know through the Vancouver filmmaking community, and they went into the woods and camped and shot this brutal, vicious, quiet, terrifying movie. And so then when I started scoring it, I had this, you know, list of cues. We do a spotting session, go through the movie and talk about what he wanted. And so I started doing these arrangements. And one of the things I said at the beginning was, look, like, there's a lot of dialogue happening in some of these sections. And if I'm doing these big choral arrangements and I, you know, voice lead appropriately for choral music, you're going to have a lot of conflicting diction, right? And it's going to pull you away from dialogue.
Yeah.
I think we should do it entirely on open vowels. So it allowed me to score as if I'm scoring an orchestra, which is really how I prefer to use voice. Like, writing words is fun and it's nice and I enjoy doing it, but I prefer to use voice as a part of the orchestra. So I arranged it as if I was writing for orchestral instruments, but then wrote and performed it all myself vocally. So there's lots of, you know, cluster harmonies and lots of very, very, very dissonant suspensions and that sort of thing. Big wide vocal range as well. So I tried to use all the different parts, especially the parts of our range as singers that are less than polished. And, you know, from going through school as a classical singer, I've pushed my range pretty far. So I've got about a 3.5, like a comfortable 3.5 octave vocal range. So I was able to sort of like really use it. And so every time he came back, he was like, oh, I'm really loving where this is going. Here's a handful of more places where I want you to score. And then here's a handful of more places where I want you to score. And normally speaking, we want to like constrain the scope of a project like that. But again, love,
you're being
money,
punished for your success.
Right? The burden of competence.
Yeah.
That was a love project.
Right.
And it was also an opportunity project because I hadn't made something as brutal as that. I'd made a lot of short content in the horror and thriller side of things. And I really, really, really love scoring thrillers and psychological stuff and really violent stuff and horror and stuff like that. But I hadn't scored in the feature length, that kind of project.
Yeah.
So on a project like that, I had the time to do it, and so I was like, let's just go for broke as much as possible. Yeah, it was a joy to do, and the movie's done pretty well and was distributed on iTunes, which is great. Yeah, one of my favorites.
What do you know why Andrew wanted to have it be in a vocal only score?
I don't. He had heard something. I believe he had said that he had heard some either choral music like in a trailer or something or in a movie or something.
Yeah.
And the notion of it. There was one thing that came about in conversation with us, and I can't recall whether it was through our discussions or whether this is something he came in with. But one of the themes in the four main characters' story is that they're all people who have women in their lives who they let down. Mm-hmm. And who they use to some degree carelessly. And I wouldn't say that on the part of the character who has violent predilections, I wouldn't say that is specifically his aim, but definitely through the filmmaker's view, you're seeing these people in the woods by themselves. It's a whole bunch of dudes in the woods, and all the voices around them are female. So it's an interesting interesting counterpoint, right?
Yeah, that's great. Well, there you go. I would just say that in interviews from future. Like, we meant to do this. It's very smart. Aren't we smart?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And you based the lyrics on Paradise Lost, right? Is that
I based the lyrics for the end piece.
Okay,
so
right.
for the final piece, there are no consonants, I believe. I don't think there are any consonants. I could be wrong. There may be one little spot where there's a couple of I used the Latin term for ravens, so corvus corax. I used that here and there, but apart from that, I don't believe there are any consonants until the end credits.
Right.
And so the text that I pulled was from Paradise Lost for the end credits music, and that's a piece that's available on most of my demo materials called Arva Valete Dulcia.
Did you put yourself into a sandbox where you're strictly constrained to only using the voice, or were there other elements that you were building into the score?
I branched into some large format percussion, but I really, really, really just wanted it to be as human generated and severe as I could make it.
How many layers of your voice would there have been at most?
At most? 6 or 7.
And, speaking from an orchestration standpoint, there are some times when doubling certain things, you're going to be watching out for, issues of intonation, all sorts of other nasty effects. And you're dealing with the human voice, which, of course, has some very famous paradigms that are now mostly just memes and jokes. Were there any issues that you encountered in recording yourself multiple times for this performance?
Good question. I would say recording myself and capturing the performance less so. We're artists and we have our little secret artist heart.
Yeah.
I go back and I listen and I'm like, fuck.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think that's ever going to end, and I'm grateful for that. It keeps me hungry, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It keeps me pushing. I put myself in a position where I had to use every single skill that I had. That's how I like to work.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good place to be.
I don't really love doing the easy stuff, honestly. The straightforward stuff. I'm fine with that. If you want, cello and cymbal wash is fine.
That idea of working at the deep end of the pool, which is also my favorite and least favorite place to be. What I do is I set the situation up so that I will fall in the deep end, and then I curse myself for doing it.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever found yourself in a sticky spot where you go, maybe I bit off more than I can chew?
I don't know that I would say I've been in that position creatively, which isn't to say that I don't run into impasses. I run into them all the time. But what I would say is it's only ever about time. Right. Biting off more than I can chew. I would say there was one situation where I was making 2 features back to back. I'm in a similar position now, but they're spaced a little bit more humanely, I will say, more-ish. So I had I had 2 weeks for one feature and 11 days for the other feature, and right smacked up to Christmas, and the first feature went late, and in a show of absolute absurdity, the second feature started early.
Oh boy.
So I ended up making 2 features at the same time over the course of about 3 weeks.
That's good times.
That was very challenging because how they were both TV movies, so there's a lot of music in it. Like it's quite funny to explain to somebody how much music that actually is. They're like, oh, there's a bunch of songs. You're just writing your songs. You're like your little songs. It's great. I'm like, it's 110 minutes of music for 124 minutes or an hour. It's an hour and 10 minutes for an hour and 24-minute movie, or an hour and 34-minute movie, right? Yeah. It's an hour and 10 minutes of music. That's an album and a half.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. When you think about it in those terms, I'm always kind of like shocked. Like when we used to go into the studio and record, like 20 minutes of music and be like, oh, this is so hard. You're like, yeah, I'm going to do that in the next 3 weeks times 3.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say time-wise and mass-wise. And then I would say that I wouldn't say that it's biting off more than I can chew, but I do struggle with the desire to innovate too much.
Right.
So one of the things I struggle with is, we use a lot of theme and variation, and sometimes I feel as though I'm repeating myself too much, and I almost never am. I'm almost always trying to do too many new things because it feels lazy to just recap, right? But recapitulation is so important to developing character themes, right? So I know this intellectually, but then I get into the project and my absurdist work ethic takes over, and I'm like, no, I should probably do this the hardest way possible and make a completely new thing at 1 hour and 12 minutes into this movie because maybe it's lazy to recap the theme. I'm like, no, it's time to pay off the thing you did earlier. Relax, Red. Yeah. Jesus.
Well, I remember when my sort of circuitous way to getting here for many, many years was sort of like yours, except my detour was starting in school for fine art. And I remember one of the first exercises they had us do, because, we were all fresh out of high school and we had very specific ways of working, is they made us attach our paintbrushes to a ruler or a meter stick. So that when we were painting, we had to stand I'd say about 5 to 6 feet away from the painting. And of course, your technique goes to garbage, but you're painting on a much larger scale and you're looking at what you're doing in the bigger scope. And I find that when I'm in sort of situations, I'm like, is this lazy? Is this recapitulation of this thing? I always think, how many times has the viewer who's seeing this movie for the first time heard this? And how are they going to feel they've never seen this before. They've never heard this music before. They're probably going to forget that they ever heard this piece. And if they do remember, they go, oh, right, yes, I've heard this before. Why am I hearing it again? And then it'll actually, then you're doing that good work. And I always have to sort of remind myself, because again, when you're that close, the way we were in art school, we're not supposed to be this close and just drawing the tiniest little nostril hairs. You want to get back from the painting a little bit, and you go, okay,
6 feet and squint.
6 feet and squint. You get that blurry vision of the big overarching thing. Yeah. I mean, and you can push. It's surprising how far you can push that. I'm a big monothematic guy. I do the opposite to Howard Shore. Bless him for how he works, and it's a wonderful score, but I would never choose to make that many themes. Totally. Because to me, the one that I really remember is the Ring theme, because that's the most powerful emotional one for me.
100%. I cap it at 3. I've got, you've got your main relationship, either your main character or your main relationship. You have the antithesis to that, and then something fun, either an environment or a plot point or something about the story or environment or that sort of thing. And this is obviously in feature length. If you're making a short or something, you don't have time for 3 themes. No. It's a bit frantic. But yeah, I try to cap it at 3. I would say that, I think, again, going back to sort of food, the thing about food, and I think it's the same thing with any sort of creative thing or thing with music, is that, you eat for a lot of different reasons. We watch movies, we listen to music, we experience art for a lot of different reasons. And it's a cultural practice, and part of culture is having a sense of where home is, right? And so there are these questions about, what denotes a Michelin star restaurant or double Michelin star or triple Michelin star restaurant? Why the French place or why the Italian place and not the transcendent pho shop in the alley? You know what I mean? What is it? And I mean, the short answer to that is white supremacy. But the longer answer to that is a sense of where home is and what feels good and right to the person subjectively. So when you go to an Italian restaurant, you're just always going to enjoy yourself. Really, when you sit down in front of really well-made Italian food, there's nothing wrong with excellent fresh mozzarella, tomato, as much basil as you have tomato, good oil, good vinegar, and salt and pepper. It's not the most adventurous thing in the entire world, but at its core, it is high value. The parts work together and they are satisfying, right? And so I would rather that all of the most innovative things got their due, but as people, sometimes what you want is a grilled cheese and a cup of soup.
Yeah.
And it's not always time to be like, I've innovated a cup of soup. Check it out. Now it's made of bees, right?
I don't cook, I
like,
innovate.
I innovated a sandwich. What's in it? Microchips. You know, like, it doesn't eat well. And so sometimes in a movie, the thing to do is not the fanciest thing. It's not the fucking Red Show. It's the movie. You are in service to creating emotional architecture. You are building a tasting menu on a theme for a customer who decided what they wanted to have for dinner. They decided. Your job's to cook that shit, right? You have to cook it.
So pivoting from, you know, a very emotionally charged where you had a film where you had to dig deep and you really are sort of pushing the boundaries on this to doing something that is less so, where you are maybe making comfort food, which is how I look at it when I do a movie of the week or, you know, something that is on the other side. Is that how you approach it? Is that your thought process when you go there? Because the other side of that too is, you know, what we're talking about in terms of being an artist, digging deep, going to your emotional reserves, putting yourself out there, putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Couldn't be more really antithetical to what you're doing when you're doing a movie of the week. But then you also have to bring something to bear that is going to resonate with an audience. What's your process for doing that on the flip side?
That's a great question. I think of scoring in all senses, and we can think of this to continue the culinary metaphor or to create a visual art metaphor for your background. The culinary metaphor would be developing your mise en place and having a unique element, having one thing that is just for you, just a little thing. And sometimes it's adding a thing and sometimes it's taking a thing away. I make no secret about my dislike for the cello and my tenuous dislike of the violin. There are places where the violin applies. I dislike the cello acutely. Not as a solo instrument, but I could do without hearing whole notes from a cello for the rest of my career. I never need to hear whole notes from a cello ever again. And all my love to my cello playing people, they can do so much more. Like, they're incredible musicians. I would rather that they were given opportunities to play dynamically and creatively. But it's just so many, like, it's the sad moment, bring on cellos.
They're the bass guitar of the orchestra.
Well, I don't know. I feel like they're just, I can't put a finger on it. It's just, it's also much unseasoned chicken to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, spicy ass chicken wings, that shit is good. But if you have a poached, unseasoned chicken wing, it's a waste. It's a waste of good resources. So what I would say is, for me, I really try to find instrumentation or themes or elements in something like a movie of the week or a romantic comedy or a comedy or something like that, that feels like it goes with the story in a way that is less than common. Which maybe I'll put this in the active voice. I pick something to be the wild card.
Right.
And I really, really, really show it.
Yeah.
So, for example, the movie that I'm making right now features a character who is resisting getting into the holiday spirit. She's really struggling to get in the holiday spirit. And so I decided that I wanted to use Celesta less like a celebration of Christmas and more like a mosquito that's going to get you while you sleep. So the Celesta in this case is really annoying.
Kind of buzzing around. And,
exactly. Celesta sounds like Christmas, and the harder she fights, the more Celesta there is.
Right. Oh, it's interesting.
Right? So instead of being like, oh, it's wonderful, it's happy, it's the holidays. No. She is pissy about it. And the Celesta's like, right? So that for me, I can look at it and say, this is a fun holiday movie, and it's going to make people feel good. Because at the end, they know, that's why they're watching this movie. They know at the end it's going to work out, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people really need that. So, the idea of being able to poke a little bit of fun at the bah humbug side of things. And also, I look at it as an opportunity for the technical side of our work. I mean, you and I have talked about this more recently as well. There's always times when maybe I'll put this differently. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I disagree with that fundamentally. Mm-hmm. You are never too old to be wrong.
Right.
There's a couple of folks that we have in common that I'm like, you need to remember that you're never too old to be wrong. And you're never too young to be wrong.
Yeah.
And you're never too young or old to be right. But it's important to remember that sometimes you get it wrong. And sometimes things change and you're going to fuck it up, right?
Yeah.
So remaining open to that fallibility, I take those projects where I feel like the music is a known quantity and I use it to innovate my processes. So I go, okay, I'm going to build myself a new template, or I'm going to give myself an excuse to change to this library of stuff that I don't often use. I'm going to make myself do it with this, or I'm going to make myself do it with that.
Yeah.
And between the deadline, the necessary deadlines of the project, and using something that is not familiar to me, I have to innovate. And it keeps that momentum going. Otherwise, you're just writing the same, diegetic music, or non-diegetic music, I should say, over and over and over again.
Yeah. Before we leave this topic, do you feel that pizzicato strings are the unseasoned chicken of comedies?
No, I would say that's the clarinet.
Ah, the clarinet. Oh man, the cello and the clarinet are getting a bad rap on this episode.
But this is the thing. They have their excellent plays. They are wonderful. I just find that the places where they are expected, I tire of them. I love the clarinet for the purpose, like Danny Elfman's use of clarinet, especially bass clarinet.
Sure.
Adore. But the with the clarinet, that's okay, but you can do it in a lot of different ways.
That's true. Yeah.
There's cooler ways to use a clarinet. I'd rather just use it in a cooler way. And I think this comes from, like, going full circle with this, I think this comes from being, a sort of rock and roll dirtbag. I just look at it and I go, would a person actually have fun playing that? Would it be a joyful playing experience?
That's, yeah.
Unlikely, right? So
you think that way even when you're doing it in the box?
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
I think about if I have a baton in my hand and I've got to make a person, I've got to, because the conductor's instrument is the orchestra, right? Mm-hmm. The conductor is a musician who plays a large body of musicians as an instrument. I've got to play this orchestra. Am I going to be I'm going to be able to pull this performance out of this person looking at this sheet of music of something they've played a million times over and isn't particularly inspired? Yeah. Am I just doing this because it's tropey, or is there going to be joy and verve in this performance? Because if there isn't going to be, then it's not really serving the movie. Because if we're creating, as I said earlier, that emotional architecture, you need to use pretty solid rebar. And if the scene calls for joy and yours is falling flat, that it's gonna tumble down, right? You really have to bring the verve, bring the joy, bring the color, bring the juiciness. Which isn't to say do everything all at the same time, but do the thing that is the most right for the purpose of the movie. So maybe the right thing is cello. I wouldn't say that I don't use cello, but what I would say is, if what we're looking for is emotion, let there be viola. If there needs to be energy, let there be ostinato in unique instruments. Let there be spiccato, know. Let there be flageolet harp. I would much rather achieve that dynamism using a unique palette, or achieve that emotional cue with an instrument that sounds particular to the character that I'm scoring, as opposed to the default position for its feelings time bring on the cellos.
Yeah. Great. I love it. I think that's a very valuable perspective. Something that we, and I mean, by we, I mean myself and all of the guests that I've had on the show so far. One thing that we've not really touched on all that much, which is kind of ironic since the show has been entirely existing within this time, is the pandemic. But it's something that when we were chatting last, you brought up specifically, and you said that you wanted to talk about this idea of whole expression and what this time has meant for you, and what it's been like to work through that.
Mm-hmm. I would love to hear more people talk about the nature of pressure. Pressure does only one thing. And what pressure does is pressure reveals. Pressure always reveals. And when you have pressure everywhere, all around you, when you are so compressed by everything that is happening, when everywhere you look, things have changed and you have a lot to lose, then that pressure reveals who you actually are. And I think what the pandemic has done for a lot of people is it has revealed to them the shit they've dealt with and the shit they haven't. You can really get a sense of how you're doing as a human being when the pressure of the world around you really comes to bear. Living a whole life is important for people to get in touch with their mental health. It's crucially important for people to get in touch with their mental, physiological health, the health of their relationships, the health of their career. Previous to COVID, I had five, but one that is kind of like could throw it away at a second's notice. I had 5 separate revenue streams, right? I had pretty much an earthquake-proof career. And truth be told, had it been an earthquake and not a pandemic, I wouldn't have lost much of anything, which is insane. That's an insane commentary.
Yeah.
The only thing that I was not prepared for was a pandemic. And so what that revealed was that I was doing pretty good, but it caught me off guard, right? Like it caught everybody off guard.
Right.
And the degree to which my mental health was in hand was pretty darn good, but it put some pressure on me that showed me that as far as I thought I had come with my own mental health, I had work to do. And so it's quite funny because you and I talked about this. I definitely put off an extrovert vibe. I am not an extrovert. I'm very much an introvert. I feel good in places where I'm interacting with people in public because it's contained and because I know it'll end and I know that I can leave. And then I go home and I sit in a quiet room and I recharge and I don't talk to anybody. I make movies in the dark at 4 a.m. And that's my happy place. No one talks to me, no one calls me, no one does, like, everybody's asleep. A bitch can work. And I really had to learn how much contact with human beings I need and how little I need, and which human beings I need that contact with, who keeps my head together, whose head I keep together, economically what I need, creatively what I need. And the main thing that I learned, the main shit that I learned that I did not have together was how unsustainable the volume of work I was doing was. I was working way too much and just white knuckling through it and writing really good content. I mean, making quality work. But when the pandemic happened, I played a show on March 13th, 2020. We were sitting between sound check and the show, and we got the public health order that Whistler was closed, and I was sitting in a bar in Whistler eating dinner.
Yeah.
And we played a show for an audience of people who were celebrating someone who was dying of cancer.
Oh,
we're like, congratulations, you're about to die.
Wow.
Yeah, a little dark. And I played one distanced show in, I want to say, June. And between that, I lost a year's worth of work.
Wow.
Between March and June, an entire year's income was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still okay because I come from a really low income family. So I earthquake proof my shit because I know what it's like to not have a safety net. And I've experienced what happens when you need it and it's not there.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta protect yourself. But I wasn't prepared for the weight that I was under in terms of sustainability physiologically and mentally for the amount of work that I was doing. And how much a part of my identity working projects back to back had become.
Right. Yeah.
I realized I was starting to miss my life a little bit. And that I wasn't maintaining my relationships, the relationships that are important to me, that I was not maintaining them. I wasn't walking my talk where that is concerned. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that, the pandemic has forced people to be alone. And I think that's really good. After my marriage ended, I very happily lived alone for a couple of years. And I had lived alone before my partner and I, my ex-husband and I had lived together. I loved living alone. I don't live alone now. My partner and I live together now, but that few years of being alone and you go home and you close the door and there's nobody there but you cannot hide. And I even though I'm a filmmaker, I didn't have a TV. I was like, get this TV out of my house. Get it out. I hate having a TV on the wall. It's like the eye of Sauron.
That's true.
Just, right? It's just like this Black Mirror, right? It's this just eye that just sucks you in and just drains you dry. I want to light some Nag Champa, put a record on, cook something, wander around, be like, has it got to be a banjo? Is it got to be a harp? Is it got to be a, what's the instrument choice? What am I working through? Maybe I should sweep the kitchen and think this problem through. Being able to be this rangy, artistic, scratching my head, being like, I've got a musical problem. I should probably clean the litter box. That'll help me figure it out. External processing works. And living alone means that you have to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, how am I doing? Really, how am I doing?
Right.
What does the kitchen look like? Is the sink full of dishes? Why is that? Am I super depressed right now? Am I really anxious? Mm-hmm. Am I taking care of myself? Am I eating foods? Am I, smoking too much weed or drinking too many glasses of wine? Or where am I at? How am I really doing? Yeah. And I think that the pandemic has forced people into it's forced people into a scenario where it's way harder to hide from their unresolved shit. Yeah. And I think that what it has also brought about is that people need to get better at saying that they're not okay when they're not okay. And the way that they can get better at that is if people get better at hearing, accepting, and embracing, creating an environment where they are okay with someone saying, I'm not okay, and going, we are not curing cancer here. You need to take a break. Yes. You need to relax. You need to heal yourself. Yeah. We need to make not only an industry and in the film scoring community, I feel like I didn't really get to this part of the answer. Having come from the music industry and then moving over into scoring, I was puffing my chest out so much thinking I needed to prove my right to exist in that space. Mm-hmm. And when I let that guard down and actually just became much more open and not protectionist, remembering that there is actually room for everybody and that every time one of our colleagues gets a job, we're all winning. Every time a bunch of us are pitching for something and I don't get it and somebody else does, I'm genuinely happy for them. There's no competition. I didn't lose a job. That's an absurd idea of you lost a job to somebody else. No, you didn't. Someone you care about because they're your colleague and many times your friend got an awesome job that would be good enough for you and is therefore good enough for them. That's a win, right? Mm-hmm. So that wholeness of life, if you're in that protectionist way and then all the resources disappear, your first reaction is going to be competing and cutting everybody else around you down because you haven't sorted through your ego shit.
Yeah.
And if your mental health isn't okay and you're panicking and you're in a situation where your boss is unwilling to hear that you need a mental health day, then it means that that job isn't sustainable outside of a perfect scenario. If you don't have the backup, if the systems around you don't allow for you to be sick, depressed, needing a fucking break, needing to pivot, needing help, not understanding something, all the basic human things, if your industry, whatever it is, doesn't allow for you to have a human experience, then when it all comes crashing down, there's no support, right? It's that we're seeing that in low-income communities. I live on the edge of Gastown, on the edge of the downtown east side in Vancouver. And a lot of people have very crappy things to say about this neighborhood, and they need to shut the hell up if they aren't going to help, honestly. Because the people down here have the most community of any community in this city, hands down. The people who are camped out in tents, the people who are experiencing homelessness or houselessness, folks who are experiencing addiction, these people look after each other. People look out for each other. They know each other's names. They have neighborliness. They share resources. And they are some of the most strong community examples of anywhere that you can see, because they have to look out for each other because the systems around them are not protecting them.
Right.
And COVID really exposed that.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that the pandemic, as you say, it like has exposed the sort of general unsustainability of a lot of the systems that we're involved in, a lot of the ways that we're approaching life, both on a micro and a macro scale, what we're doing for ourselves, how we're interacting with one another. Do we have community? What does that even mean? The ways that we're working. I find it so ironic sometimes watching films that are made that are about these very deeply human things. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to experience things? What does it mean to be healthy or unhealthy? What does it mean to need help? And they're made, these things that are talking about these issues are made in this completely unsustainable way, where those things are there's probably like, a good percentage of the crew that's in dire need of help and are probably experiencing the exact same things the characters are experiencing. And yet this is the world that we're sort of operating in. It's very strange. So to turn things around a little bit, is there anything right now that is sort of captivating your attention? Like, let's say a piece of music you've heard, a film you've watched, or is there any kind of musical thing that you're into right now that's got you fired up?
Yes. So a couple of things. I'm scoring features kind of back to back right now. And I'm grateful that there's a little bit of sort of not extra, but they're not quite as compressed schedule wise as they sometimes have been in past. So I am also producing a couple of records at the same time. So we're in the sort of writing phase. I'm working with a fantastic songwriter named Bill Marchant, who's also a preeminent actor and teacher. A couple of other folks, and I'm assisting with some songwriting on the part of a couple of people who've been vocal students with me in past, or people who've asked me to produce for them. And so I'm finding it really exciting to help people hack making music in whatever context they want to do it, so that it feels accessible. There are a lot of sort of biases this way, of people thinking they have to be like a proper musician or this or that and the other thing.
Right.
And all paths are good. All ways are good. As long as they're pointed in the direction you want to go, all paths are good. From a listening perspective, I actually went through a big period of time, I would say in the early 2010s type thing, until about 2017 or 2018, where I just didn't want to listen to music at all.
Oh, wow.
Listening to music was overwhelming to me. I felt so congested. I wanted to focus on writing my own music, but I wasn't listening to music for pleasure at all.
Wow.
However, then I started taking SNRIs and realized that I was just terribly depressed. and refound my love of music. And since then, I've been a little bit obsessed with Jacob Collier because he's a genius.
Yep.
Leon Bridges, adore. And I'm really excited about people who are just really joyfully excited about music. So bands like Snarky Puppy or Scary Pockets or Lake Street Dive. I also have a little soft spot in my heart for I'm sure you've heard of Postmodern Jukebox.
Yeah.
They do, I don't know if they're still doing it, but every once in a while, if I need to just give myself a little bit of an up, they do this thing called Saturday Morning Slow Jams. And it's slow jam versions of Saturday morning cartoon themes.
Oh, wow. That's
Please
cool.
watch DuckTales. DuckTales, also like DuckTales fucking bangs. Like that's a bop. That's a certified bop. What I'm finding really exciting is watching incredibly successful artists do the interesting creative thing that they've always wanted to try because they have to give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
Lemonade and Black is King are two examples of like single works that are audiovisual, it's spoken word poetry, it's filmmaking, it's dance, it's costume design, it's this like whole multi-dimensional product, and I love that. And so watching sort of like large works like that is really creative for me and really helps me keep creative. So I hope more people make that content, and the content that is made like that, I hope more of it gets more of an audience, because I think one of those things about being a musician is working specifically as a recording artist. You're always thinking about what's going to get the audience, right? And if you think about somebody who's like just writing for their own purposes and who doesn't really consider the audience necessarily as explicitly as like a recording artist who's trying to chart, who's trying to like sell out a tour, sell some merch, whatever. When you're just writing and saying, what is the most interesting thing to me right now, and just writing that and knowing that that is the purest authentic expression of your creative vision, I think that's really exciting for people who are in that place where they're like, I have a thesis to explore. What is my thesis to explore, right? Something that's, what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be queer? Like I'm a queer woman. What does it mean to be whatever your identity is? How do you explore the root of your humanity, right? And the ways that you can do that with multi-genre, multi-level art that doesn't fit at all into the pop model. There isn't any space for that. We've seen time and time again at the Grammys, like when Lemonade didn't win Album of the Year and Adele was like, this makes no sense. This should be out. Like Lemonade was a singularity, but the industry is just not equipped to understand something outside of a very particular box, right? And that's what it does. But there's this new thing opening up, like This Is America by Childish Gambino. But this mixed medium is fascinating. Like this is how we actually consume media. We're not only ever listening to like pop of a certain sort, or not only ever eating Italian food, to go back to the food analogy, right? We do cross-pollinate and we do enjoy other elements and stuff like that. And so as long as we're in a respectful, obviously culturally respectful place, why would we ever want to listen to a song that's 3 minutes and 15 seconds long and has a bridge in the middle and a key change and like all the things, when you could have the sound of, dance and mics around a room, or very close-up photography, or all of these things that are so creative to explore that way. You know what I mean? I know I'm kind of rambling now, but I guess I would just say that the thing that's really exciting me right now is people asking themselves a creative question. I wonder what I can do with this.
Yeah.
I wonder what I can get away with as well. I wonder what I could get away with doing this.
That's great. I love that.
how explicitly can I say this thing? How far can I push this? Not in a usurious, culturally disrespectful way, but more, how can I push the depths of my expression, or how deeply can I weave these things together that I care about?
Love it.
Yeah.
I love that perspective. I think that's great. And I hope we'll hear lots more from you where you are plumbing the depths and saying, what can I get away with?
Thank you.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure and a total joy. Thank you so much for taking the time and exploring this fascinating sort of looping through all these different ideas and different routes to getting to that creative question and getting to that place where we're all trying to end up. Where can people find you and follow you in your journey and your adventures?
Yes. So on Instagram, They Call Me Red. My website is redheartbreaker.com. You'll see some redirects there to a couple playlists and to my agency page at Core Music Agency, where I am very grateful to be, very proud to be represented. The team there is fantastic. I adore them. All love to them. I believe Twitter is They Call Me Red as well. I need to double check that. You'll see more politics on Twitter. I don't believe that you can avoid politics. It's the world we live in. You got to do it. So you'll hear some strong, unvarnished opinions there. So giddy up. But yeah, website is redheartbreaker.com. Instagram's They Call Me Red, and you should be able to see, it's either They Call Me Red or Red Heartbreaker on Twitter as well.
Amazing. Any parting words?
Don't fake the funk on a nasty dunk. Pashoo! No.
Oh man, I was ready to leave it at that. I would have loved that.
I know, that's a Homestar Runner reference. I'm dating myself. My parting words would be, I love you, I miss you. Get your shit together. And wear a fucking mask, please, for the love of God.
Beautiful. Red, you're the best. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Adrian. And also to you, thank you so much for just being this constant, joyful, available, wise force of creative verve and love. You're just such an important part of the community of composers, and we're all really lucky to be able to have access to you. So thank you for everything you do. That's very generous. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.